Do you have a child that is gender confused? Are you the parent of somebody that is either identified as transgender using different pronouns or some other type of gender confused, just propaganda that's being shoved down your kids' throats? Well, I created the Biblically Parenting Gender Confused Children support group for parents just like you. This support group is completely free. We meet monthly, and you are able to connect with other like minded Christian parents that are struggling with how to parent children that are gender confused. They're getting all sorts of nonsense brought to them by the world, and I want to help connect parents that are going through similar struggles and be able to tackle this issue through a biblical worldview. If you are interested in joining this group or know somebody that might be interested in this group, head on over to faithfullyengaged.com and there's more information about the support group there. I have a link down in the description below. Well, today my guest, his name is Brad Brandon. He has a lot of experience specifically in Nigeria with Christians there. So, Brad, I'm really excited to get this conversation going. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of a nonprofit organization called Across Nigeria. And basically, what we do is we work with the Muslims in northern Nigeria. And then we also work with the persecuted church in northern Nigeria as well. There's thousands and thousands of persecuted Christians there. In fact, last year there were about 5,068 Christians that were killed just last year alone in northern Nigeria. So we're helping the persecuted Christians, those who are being persecuted for their faith, and then also trying to reach the Muslims in northern Nigeria as well. It's kind of a dual operation at the same time.
It's really interesting hearing this from an American perspective. But just before we hit record here, Brad and I were talking about where we're located. I'm in Oklahoma. He's in Connecticut, and certainly there's some differences between Oklahoma and Connecticut. Not saying there's
Sure.
not any cultural things, but in the United States compared to Nigeria or just other kind of some of these dangerous parts of the world. For those of us that have lived in the United States for their whole lives, it's kind of hard to comprehend what that's like in some of those dangerous parts of the world. So for you, what's that been like working in a pretty dangerous part of the world?
Yeah, it's in fact it is. It's the most dangerous place to be a Christian in
Hmm.
northern Nigeria right now. Uh, there are more Christians killed in northern Nigeria than anywhere else in the world. In fact, if you took all the Christians that were for their faith in the entire world, 90% of those would have been killed in northern Nigeria. So you're right. It is a very dangerous place, very different than here in the US, where you can walk out your front door and you can have the expectation of getting wherever you're going and back home safely. That expectation is not so much in northern Nigeria. Most of northern Nigeria is controlled by Sharia law. And just to get into the religious aspect of it, it's controlled by Sharia law, which is like the combination of religion and government. Here in the U.S., our culture is more like separation of church and state. The government is one thing, religion is another thing, and they're relatively separate from each other. I mean, they pretty much are. In northern Nigeria, under Sharia law, it's the exact opposite. They're not separated at all. In fact, they're one and the same. The religion is the government, and the government is the religion. And so, under Sharia law is where you get punishments like if you steal something, they cut your hand off, which is a common occurrence in northern Nigeria. If you're caught doing drugs, you get 40 lashes, with a cat of nine tails, which is like a whip with shards of metal at the end of it. And then one of the biggest punishments, and of course, Sharia law is enforced differently depending on what country you're in or what region of the world you're in. Northern Nigeria, they enforce it very strictly. And so under that is a doctrine called Arima Sharif, which means so what that means is that if you're a Muslim and you convert to Christianity, under Sharia law, it is legal for your family to either kill you or hire somebody to kill you just because you've converted from Islam to Christianity. It's completely legal, and in fact encouraged by the government there. So we deal a lot of times with that fallout, people trying to escape when their lives are in danger, when they're being haunted, even by their own family and their own community. And that's one of the aspects of our work that we do. That is, we have a refugee facility where we take people in who are being hunted and who are facing violence. Not only that, but on top of it, I mean, take the religious persecution away from it. It's just a dangerous place to live, period. Uh, there's about 2,000 IDP camps, which are internally displaced persons camps, throughout Nigeria. There's about 3 million people in those IDP camps, and the conditions are absolutely horrible. Just lack of food, lack of clean water, lack of health care. I mean, you name it, they're lacking it in these places where tens of thousands of people live in one small condensed area, just because they've either lost their home to fire, they've lost their home to flood, they've lost their home to invaders who've come in and invaded their village and taken over. I mean, just a host of reasons why people end up in these IDP camps. So you have all like a chasm of all of these things happening, and it's just absolute chaos. In northern Nigeria, it's basically like the Wild West. There's no law, there's no order, there's no anything, and anything can happen. And yeah, so that's where we work, right in the middle of all of that. Groups like Boko Haram, which is an Islamic extremist group, a militant group. We operate in a lot of the areas where they control the area that we operate in. ISWA, which is the Islamic State of West Africa, which is the new ISIS, by the way. After we went in and kind of cleaned out Syria, it did weaken ISIS, but they just diverted those resources to West Africa. And now the Islamic State of West Africa has more resources than they know what to do with. In fact, the Nigerian military, this was about 3 years ago, the Nigerian military pulled out of northern Nigeria. The soldiers basically just walked off the job. And the reason they said was because Boko Haram and ISWA have better weapons and better technology than we do. There's no way we can win against them. It's a suicide mission. So they just walked off. But that's where we go. That's where there's great opposition, there's greater opportunity. So we go in looking for those opportunities, those doors that God opens for us to minister in those areas and do what we can by God's grace.
You kind of just started to answer this question I had brewing here, that after that whole litany of danger, and you've got this, the Islamic extremist groups going on, and I know you really just had scratched the tip of the iceberg there as far as some of the danger that goes
Yeah.
on there. Doesn't necessarily sound like the place that you want to take a vacation and have this nice resort and all these happy good times there. You kind of got into that reasoning there at the end there, but I guess that question is why go into such a dangerous spot of the world like that?
It isn't a place that you would go to vacation. In fact, I think it was Voice of the Martyrs wrote an article in one of their publications. Maybe this was like 6 months ago or something like that. And they basically started the whole article by saying, who in their right mind would go to northern Nigeria to minister and to operate there? And a few of my friends read that and just kind of laughed and thought, I know who does that. Yeah, it's really has to be a calling, right? Because you have to walk into that situation understanding that you're doing something that's way bigger than I am. You're part of something that is bigger than me. And then when you go there and you're called and you walk in that the confidence of that calling, knowing that God has you there for a reason and a purpose. I honestly I can't think of any other reason why I would be there other than that's exactly where God wants me, and that's where I'm most comfortable. That's where I love to be. That's where I feel at home. And that's all because that's how God has shaped me and gifted me to do the things that need to be done in that place. Other than that, I'd rather be called to Florida or Hawaii or some tropical place like that, suffering for the Lord on the beach or something. But I know that's not where God has called me, so I wouldn't be happy there.
I think that's just such a huge point there of logically just and if we take a more secular worldly type of mindset, yeah, there's no reason to go there. That's not going to enrich your life in the sense of like worldly aspirations and goals and getting rich and
Right,
enjoying your time
right,
and everything. But that's not what it's about. And I love what you mentioned there that you can have all those riches and goodness, we know stories of all sorts of celebrities that have even killed themselves that you
right.
think they have it all and clearly they don't. That
Yeah,
being where God has intended you to be, there's nothing greater than that. That's what we're called to do. Is to not just do our own will, but to follow God's will for us.
yeah. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all designed for a greater purpose. And if we're in pursuit of that purpose, or even if we're fulfilling that purpose, either one of those two is where you really find happiness and contentment and true joy. When you're operating outside of that, fulfilling that, or pursuing that purpose, I think that's when we start to become discontented, and then we become angry. We get into trouble. All kinds of things begin to unravel when we're operating outside of that. So you could have $100 million in the bank, and if you're not pursuing your purpose or fulfilling your purpose, you're kind of a lost soul just wandering aimlessly in this life, and that's not what God has intended for any of us. Yeah,
Absolutely. Uh, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into kind of those two different spheres that you had. The one of trying to reach the Muslims there, that's more of the evangelism side, and then more of that's kind of the ministry type of side towards the persecuted Christians that are there. I wanted to start with the outreach there with the Muslims.
yeah,
So that's a difficult thing to do in any part of the world. But when you already have this just extreme violent situation there in Nigeria, that seems like you would have to be pretty calculated in how you go about that. So I would love for you to speak a little bit more. Like, what is that outreach to Muslims there in northern Nigeria? What does that look like?
yeah. So we travel all throughout northern Nigeria. I mean, all the way up to Nigeria, even into Nigeria. uh, and from east to west. Used to be that the violence was kind of isolated to the northeast, in the Maiduguri area. That's kind of the birthplace of. But now it's the violence is equal from east to west. Anywhere you go in the north, you're going to run into violence or violent groups or something like that. And yeah, I mean, basically, what we do is it is calculated in the sense that we're not foolish. We do take risks, but they're calculated risks. They're not foolish risks. We don't just walk into any village and say, "Here we are, listen to us. Here's Bibles, and we'd like to start a church here." That would be foolish. But what we do is we really get to know people in that culture and in that area, and then those relationships lead to other relationships, and those lead to introductions to other groups of people. And so we've developed over time. We've been doing this for about 7 years, but we've developed a pretty good network of people that we know, people who know us, more importantly, people who know us. And when we go into a Muslim village, we don't go in proclaiming the word of God. We go in just showing the love of Christ. Really, that's what we do. One of the ways that we do that is we might bring in a water filtration system, or we might bring in some medication for their kids who are dealing with something that we have some medication for. We'll help them really any way that we can. And one of the things that has happened, particularly among the Fulani Muslims, which are one of the most dangerous and violent groups in northern Nigeria as well, it's Boko Haram, ISWA, and Fulani Muslims. In fact, just this past Christmas, just a few weeks ago, there were about 190 Christians that were killed by Fulani Muslims on Christmas Day, on Christmas morning. I don't know if you heard about that in the news. But that was Fulani Muslims who did that. That's the same people that we work with. One of the ways that we found to really just sort of uh, become great friends and develop a mutual trust is that we build schools in Fulani Muslim villages that teach their children. We actually use the Bible to teach their children to read and write English. Now, if you can read and write English in northern Nigeria, that's like a college education because it opens up so many other doors of opportunity for their children. And they see that and they know that. So we develop a relationship with a Fulani Muslim village, and then as the Lord leads, of course, and as the Holy Spirit leads us, uh, we look for opportunities to introduce the idea of starting a school in their community or in their village. And so far, we have not been turned down. We have
Hmm.
3 schools throughout northern Nigeria in Fulani Muslim villages. Uh, One school has about 450 students, another has 400, and another has, I think, 475. And they're all 475 students. And they're all in northern Nigeria. And we just really show them the love of Christ by teaching their children the Bible. And in turn, we teach them about things in the Bible and Christ and who Jesus was and all those things. But we really don't seek to evangelize or proselytize their children because that really would be offensive. Obviously, you could imagine if we came in there and started, trying to convert their children, they would get upset by that. But really, what we do is train our teachers who teach in those schools to develop relationships with the parents. And so it's through those relationships with the teacher and the students and the teacher and the parents that we've really been able to reach so many Muslims in northern Nigeria is just from those relationships that develop. And then from there, there's other connections that are made. One parent might know somebody else. In fact, one of our schools was started because one parent in one of our schools had a sister in another village across the country, and he told her what was going on, and she said, "Oh, send them to our chief to talk to our village and see if they can set up a school." And so we went there, and the same thing happened. We talked to the chief. The chief loved the idea, and we were able to start a school there in her village. So it's just those kind of connections and that networking. It takes time to do that. I can be impatient at times and want to see more progress, but I really just try to trust the Lord that it's got to be in God's timing. And so really, it's just showing the love of Christ. That's really the greatest tool that we have, and that's how we reach Muslims in northern Nigeria. Now, one of the cool things that happens from that is wherever we have built and started a school and operate a school in that area, the violence drops by 70%. 70% less violence in that area where we have a school operating. And so I look at that and I'm like, that's the solution to the problem. I mean, even our State Department is sending, what did they send? $700 million last year to Nigeria to try to quell the violence that's going on. It doesn't seem to do anything. I don't see any impact from our tax dollars that are sent there every year. The Nigerian government certainly hasn't been able to do anything. But I look at, we bring the gospel of the peace of Jesus Christ into these areas, and that's exactly what it produces. It produces peace in the areas where we're operating. So I hope that answers your question, but that's kind of what we do to go into those areas to reach.
I think that's an incredible strategy and just story in general. I think as Christians, often we think of, and this is definitely some of the Americanized version, we think of that evangelism and reaching people of, all right, how many how many numbers did we check? How many raised hands did we get during the prayer or whatever? And I'm not completely discounting any and all of that.
Sure.
But there's a different level here of building community, especially in a gospel just starved area. To
Yes. Yeah.
use scripture to teach how to read and write, I mean that is an incredible tool there. And when you were sharing
Yeah.
that was amazing to me that these very militant Muslims like are okay with that, but it helps
They
teach
are.
their kids.
Yes.
It gives them that college education, like you're saying.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's an incredible way to impact people. That's not just about checking the box off. It's very action oriented.
It's action orientated, and I think too that in the US we are very much geared for seeing instant results. So like you mentioned, I'll use the illustration you said, and not that there's anything wrong with this particularly, but in a church service, you might walk away, the pastor might walk away and say, "Oh, we had 20 people raise their hand to receive Christ." We want to get those tangible results right away. In Nigeria, northern Nigeria, it's not like that. You can't do that. It takes time. It's really relational evangelism, where you have to build relationships with people first before they're ever going to listen to you on the level of what you believe about God and Jesus and all of those things. And so it's some villages. It's taken us 7 years to get in there and be trusted and be endeared and taken in. And it's just constant uh, sowing into. I call it garden. Like you got to sow into that garden if you're going to reap fruit. It doesn't just instantly come to you. You have to weed it. You have to water it. You have to make sure the soil's right. Make sure it's in the right sunlight. All of those things. It takes investment and time. And I think we're not accustomed to that in the U.S. We're accustomed to quick results. I put something in, I should get something out right away. And that's just not how it is. Yeah.
And I think that's really healthy for those of us in the States to have that recognition, not just in war-torn Nigeria, although that's incredibly necessary there. But we could take a lot of that in our own backyard as well. You got a kid that's dropped out of church and is unsaved. So yeah, let's pour in all resources. Let's throw Bibles at them and all these things to try to get them
Yeah.
back into church. And
Right.
again, not those things aren't all bad, but are you trying to do it just on your own quick timing, or ultimately are you trusting God that He's got a
That's right.
plan, and let's trust Him to take care of this? And sure, He can use us, but it's not about our speed and efficiency to get it done.
Yeah.
It sounds like you what you've been doing in Nigeria, it's forced you to do that. There's no other way
It
around that.
has. Absolutely. It has. Because there's no other option. I think one of the things that you see as a result of that is look at discipleship in the churches in the US. Churches are really struggling with this concept of discipleship. It's because with discipleship, it takes time. There's no substitute for time when it comes to discipleship and personal growth, spiritual growth. So churches in the U.S. we're really struggling with that. We see the importance of discipleship, so people talk about it often, but churches are really struggling to come to grips with how do we really become effective disciple makers, not just leading people to the Lord and adding numbers, but then making disciples of Jesus Christ. I think in Nigeria, I don't want to say that we've solved that problem, but I think it comes much more naturally because from the onset that we're reaching somebody with the gospel, we understand this is going to take time. So after they come to Christ, it's not a surprise to us that, okay, now there's spiritual growth. Guess what? It's going to take time. And we're going to have to spend time with them. And we're going to have to sit with them and have a meal and have conversations over and over and over, maybe 3 or 4 times a night with some people and just talk to them about their faith and help them grow. I think in the U.S., a lot of times we don't have time for that. Just like that true organic discipleship. And I think that's one way that it manifests.
That makes a lot of sense, and again, I think there's a lot to learn from that. Kind of transitioning this into more on the Christian side. I wanted to start with more of a specific question that, especially if you get a Muslim to convert, and again, that's a massive decision and it affects the entire
Yes.
family. What does that discipleship, like you're talking about, what's that look like specifically in that situation? How do you disciple somebody that's giving up everything? What do you do with them in that situation?
So let's go back and just talk about like what it looks like when a Muslim converts to Christianity in northern Nigeria. Um, it looks very different than it does here in the U.S. and it's hard for, I think, a lot of times us from the U.S. to get our minds wrapped around it. But they literally lose everything. They lose it all. So if you're a Muslim and you convert to Christianity, if you escape with your life, you've lost your home. You have lost your business if you own one. Your bank accounts have been frozen. No one will sell you anything at the market. You can't go and get any medical care from a doctor. He won't see you because you're a convert. Um, they lose it all. They've lost their family, their support system. No one will talk to them, even if they choose not to kill that person. They certainly won't contact them or have any contact with them. So they have lost it all. We have one woman who's in our refugee facility, and she was pregnant. While she was pregnant, one of our pastors led her to the Lord, and so she became a Christian. Her husband divorced her at that left her, but sort of kept her in like a hospital room, but kept the door closed, locked. So she was in a prison, and they fed her. It's almost like they were using her to incubate the baby. She gives birth to the baby. She doesn't even see the baby, doesn't get to touch the baby, doesn't even get to see the baby. She gives birth to the baby right out of the womb. They take the baby away and give it to the father, and the father takes off. She feels like they're going to kill her now. So she escapes, like, hours after she gave birth to this baby. And now she's in our refugee facility, and somewhere out there, she has a child that she's never even seen before. So they literally come to us with nothing, the clothes on their back that they've escaped with. So I guess sometimes in the north, when they are able to stay where they are and where they live, the discipleship happens a lot of times, like the Bible mentions, Nicodemus by night kind of thing, and so it happens behind closed doors. It happens undercover. It happens out in the bush where nobody can see. Um, but eventually, people catch on to what's happening, and they'll get labeled as a convert. And in those cases, they come to us in our refugee facility. And at our refugee facility, we take in people who have converted from Islam to Christianity. Uh, and their life is somehow in danger to one degree or another. They need our help. So we take them in. We take care of all of their felt needs. So they have needs of food. They have need of just even like a bed, a mattress to sleep on, clothes, those types of things. We give them a garden plot where they can grow food. Um, we even give them some cooking utensils. We have just small, tiny little 1 or 2 room apartments in our dormitories at our refugee facility. Uh, and then also one of the most important things that we do is we have a pastor that oversees the refugee facility, and he is a discipler. So he will spend the time with them over meals. I mean, it really is less of a church and more of a community of believers. It really reminds me a lot of the early church when I go there. Like when I walk into these situations, and we have pockets of persecuted Christian communities throughout the north, and they're less churches. Like to us, we think of church as somewhere that I go. Um, In northern Nigeria, church is not some place that you go to once a week. It's a community that you live in. And so the discipleship happens within that community once they get to us. It is very difficult to disciple them when they are in the north, in the far north, because you have to do it under the cover of, you have to do it being hidden. And so it becomes difficult to do that 3 or 4 times a week when you meet with somebody and they want to do a Bible study or learn how to pray. Just something as simple as that. Um, so I hope that answers your question, but that's kind of what it looks like.
I mean, again, just I hope those of you that are listening to this, especially those of you that have never traveled internationally or just don't really have the concept of some of the things that Brad's mentioning here, um, to really take this and take some time to. I know you probably hear this often of being grateful for the freedoms that you have here and things of that nature. But sometimes that falls flat. It's like, yeah, we got it. No, that's great. But you hear these type of stories, and to be able to pray, to read the Bible together, um, you don't think of that here as being a big deal, but that's a huge deal,
It's
that
a
we
huge
were
deal.
able to do
Yeah.
that freely.
Yeah.
Mm.
Even just to have a group of believers gather, I talked about the Christian communities that we have throughout the North. I mean, just to have them get together in it safely and not be attacked, not be raided, not be run out of where they are. It's just, like a big success. I'll give you one quick story from the North. We had started a church in the North. It grew to probably 20, 30 people, something like that. And we decided, okay, this is big enough to where we'd like to build a building. And so we built a building, and it was out in the bush. And we showed up the first Sunday. We were going to do like a dedication Sunday, and when I say building, it was more of like a shack. It had cinder block walls, but it was more of like a shack that we just built in the middle just to keep the rain off. And so we did the open house the first Sunday, dedication Sunday. It was great, had a good time. Came back the next Sunday, and it was torn to the ground. I mean, every block was taken off and scattered. We rebuilt it and sort of had like a second dedication again. So we spent a Sunday in there. It was great, had a celebration. Here we are back again. We came back the next Sunday, and it was gone. It was destroyed again. So we decided, okay, there's a mango tree that is like, over here. We went and just met under the mango tree just because it's out of the sun. So a lot of people will meet under mango trees. They provide a lot of shade. So we thought, okay, we'll just have church under a mango tree. That's fine. No big deal. We came back the next Sunday, and the mango tree was cut down. And right now, that church is currently meeting in a building that looks like they have to dress up the building to look like a storage house, like a storehouse, because if it looks like a church, or somebody suspects it of being a church, they'll either destroy it or the government will confiscate it or something will happen. So yeah, it just kind of speaks to that, like, just to be able to do the simple things that we do here, like go to church or do a Bible study or anything like that, gather to pray for a prayer meeting. It's like a big deal over there. And it's sad sometimes Christians here in the U.S. take those things for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. As you're saying these things, you've kind of alluded to some things that you and some of the churches do, but with obviously some of the dangerous things that are happening, all the hundreds of Christians that get killed. Uh, what are some of the things that you do while in Nigeria to help keep you and the people around you safe?
That's a good question, because a lot of people will ask me, do you travel with security or are you armed? Uh, a lot, even in Nigeria, they have strict gun laws over there, so only the bad people end up having guns. But really, um, even if I could carry a weapon, I don't think that I would. And here's the reason why. I think that it sends a wrong message. Now, don't get me wrong. I love my firearms. I'm an American. I believe in the Second Amendment. Don't get me wrong. Um, but I think that if we were to walk into a Muslim village and we had weapons with us, it it says something. It says something about our trust. It says something about our intent to be there. It says something about, hey, we're good as long as you don't mess with us. If you mess with us, then and and I also kind of think too that sometimes you just got to trust the Lord. And I'm not trying to over spiritualize that, but really sometimes you just have to give it to God and say, you know what, my safety is of the Lord. And God, you bring me where you want me to go, and I will trust that you will take care of everything else. I feel like if we were to travel around with armed security, that our trust would be in something else. And I'm not trying, again, we take calculated risks. I'm not trying to, take foolish risks. But I worry about the message that would send. Um, I worry about where I'm putting my trust. And we've had people who have been killed. One of our pastors in 2021, who worked as a scout for us, like I was talking about before, did a 2-week tour through northern Nigeria. We were visiting with Muslim villages, talking to them. We came back to Kano. We dropped him off at his house, and we came back the next morning to pick him up. And his church was burned to the ground. His house was burned to the ground, and he was hacked to death in his bed. And so so there are times when that trust is put to the test, but you really, at the end of the day, just have to say, okay, God, we're going to continue to trust you and continue to trust you to bring us into where you want us to be. It doesn't mean that we don't take precautions. Of course, when we go into a certain area, we never come out the same way we went in. So we will always leave an area differently than when we came in. So if we come in on one road, we go out another road. We don't travel at night. All of our traveling is done during the day and at certain times. When we're in certain parts of the north, we always show up unexpected. So we never call ahead and say, hey, we're about 15 minutes away, or we're an hour away, or we'll be there on Saturday afternoon. We never do that. We just show up, which really is conducive to the Nigerian culture because they kind of do the same thing. People just show up at your house all the time, and you give them a meal and sit around and talk for a while. But we do take those kind of precautions to keep us safe. When we're driving on the roads, we travel at a high rate of speed and we don't stop for anything. In Nigeria, a lot of times they'll set up decoys. An injured woman on the side of the road would be one example. You pull over to help that woman and she's a decoy, and that's how they grab you. So we're constantly aware of our surroundings. And we do ask God to give us wisdom, but there's time. It's amazing because when we travel like that, you see God do miracles. We literally came into a town once, and the town had been taken over by Islamic militants. And just as we entered the town, they set up a roadblock behind us after we got into the town. And we were stuck in that town for that night. We prayed all night long. Every road was blockaded, so we couldn't get out. We had one of our scouts call us in the morning and say, hey, this certain road is open. For whatever reason, they've moved the blockade out of there. So anytime we travel, we are ready to go at a moment's notice. I mean, we are packed and in the truck in less than a minute. At any given time, middle of the night, we're ready to go. Sleep with your clothes on, your bags packed, all that kind of stuff. And so we hit the road. We went out that road and we saw where the blockade was. We got about an hour down the road, and our scout called us and said, "Are you out? Did you make it out?" And we said, "Yeah, we made it out." And he said, "Oh, praise the Lord, because they put the blockade back after you left." I mean, it was just the first thing that hit me was it was like God parting the Red Sea, letting us go through, and then God closing it behind us. That's what it is. But you see those kinds of things all the time when you're operating and living in that kind of faith.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you point out some of the practical things to be done. Not driving at night, that things of that nature.
Hmm.
I mean, God definitely calls us to be wise, but you're also recognizing there's some things you can't do. You couldn't move that blockade, but it
That's right.
was. And that's where that
Yeah.
that trust is so important. Like you said with firearm usage, I myself am firearm owner, as most of or
Yep.
many of the listeners are. Definitely that protection of your family and everything. It's great. But you're not in your house. You're in a very different location. And if we take that further, I mean, I don't think you're going to outgun some of these terrorist
Right.
organizations out there. Like
That's
that,
yeah.
eventually you're
Yeah.
going to run out of ammo there.
Right.
And it goes back to that trust, that trust of
Yeah.
God, no matter what. I, Again, that's something that we see with a lot of the uh, early church martyrs, whether it's Stephen or to some of these other missionaries throughout the years. Dying for your faith, while tragic, that's something that we want to try to avoid if we can through wisdom. There's worse things out there than dying for your faith.
That's right.
And I think that's really, really important. If you're going to take that call to go to Nigeria, take that call to go talk to your neighbor across the street, wherever you are. There's a
Yeah.
level of faith that God not just will protect me, but that He'll be glorified, and whatever happens, ultimately is in His will.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and I always ask people like what's your Nigeria? And they kind of look at me like what do you mean? And I'm like, my Nigeria is Nigeria. The thing that I'm called to do is go to Nigeria. But we're all called to do something. So what is that thing in your life that you're called to do? Now, that might be starting a Bible study at your school. It might be starting a prayer meeting before work, at the factory or whatever it is. Just go do that thing that God has called you to do. So seek after it. And then when you find it, because the Bible says, seek and you will find. That's what God says. So if you're seeking your calling, you'll find it. And when you find it, fulfill it and and do whatever it is that God has called you to do. I think that so many Christians are living this complacent life where like they are not actively seeking their Nigeria. And I use that you know how I'm using that, but not that they need to be called to Nigeria, but like you said, maybe just talking to a neighbor is your Nigeria. But whatever it is, get into the business of fulfilling what God has called you to do.
I love that. I was about to ask a question along those lines, and you really answered it brilliantly. Of go out and do something. Little bit about my it's about my mom, but she's traveled to Indonesia many times, so different Muslim area, but still some similar type of stories there, and has been throughout all over the world, especially with different Muslim groups. And uh, she says that all the time when she's talking with people, that you don't have to travel across the world. If you would like to, or if God's calling you, then yes, go do that.
Do
But
it. Yeah.
you do need to do something, even if that is in your hometown, across the street, praying for a missionary. That's something that I actually really love about what our church does, my church, that we support a missionary family, and we have constant different updates about them, and being able to pray through them specifically, not just a
Right.
broad area, but specific people. Goodness, there's all sorts of things you can do to be involved, but it's not going to just fall in your lap and do it for you. Like you got to do something. So I love the way that you put that.
Awesome. Yeah. Praise the Lord.
Well, I'm sure those of us that have been, for me, listening to this, and then for other people that are listening to the podcast, would want to be in touch with you after the show or learn more about you and your organization. So, how can they learn more about you and your organization once this show airs?
Yeah, so our organization is called Across Nigeria, And our website is acrossnigeria.org. So if they just go to acrossnigeria.org, on that website are just all the things that we do, all the ministries that we have in Nigeria. On January 15th, we're about to launch a gospel outreach through broadcast, broadcasting radio signals into the remote areas of northern Nigeria to reach the Muslims. It's a radio broadcast that's done in Hausa and Fula, which is the language of the Fulani people. So that airs on January 15th. You can go to our website, acrossnigeria.org. That's on there. What we do with the schools is on there. Our refugee facility, all of that stuff is at acrossnigeria.org. And also on there is a way for you to sign up for our email newsletter. And we send that out about once a week, and we just kind of give you real-time updates of what's happening in northern Nigeria, what's going on, what we're doing, what God is doing. We send out testimonies of Muslims who've come to faith in Christ. All of that is at acrossnigeria.org. That's the best way to get a hold of me. Our number's on there. People can certainly call, write letters. Our address is on there as well. All of that at acrossnigeria.org.
And I'll have that linked down in the show notes below if you want to click on that pretty easily there.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Brad, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And yeah, I've learned so much about northern Nigeria that I did not know. And like I said, only scratched the surface there.
Awesome. Thanks, Johnny. This has been great. I've had a great time.
Great. All right. And thank you to everybody that tuned in today. And we'll catch you on the next episode.